Okay, it's 11 o'clock and I do like to start on time. So we're going to make a start. And to any latecomers, no worries, just find a seat and wherever you can. So welcome everyone to Supporting Autistic Girls at School. My name's Katie and I'm today's MC and founder of Yellow Ladybugs. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to each of you, and I really hope today is everything that you hope it to be. And I know many of you have come from a distance or travelled and made an effort and rearranged things to be here, so we're really grateful for your presence. Yellow Ladybugs is dedicated to the happiness, success and celebration of autistic girls and women. And what we really try and do is raise acceptance and awareness about the female presentation of autism in all sectors: education, employment, medical and the general community. We strive to create positive, inclusive experiences for our tribe and often advocate for their rights together. And we really do support identity first language, which we will be using today, and uphold the values of nothing about us without us, which is why we're so proud to have so many autistic women on our committee and board, and we consider ourselves an autistic-led organisation. So today we're here to understand how we can better support autistic girls at school, which has been such a highly requested topic from our community. I'm so grateful for our panellists today, and I'll do a quick intro and introduce them further later on, but Ebony is back by popular demand. She is a teacher and as a woman on the spectrum will provide us some really good insights. Chloe Hayden, aka Princess Aspian, has been a Yellow Ladybugs ambassador for several years now, and she's going to share her unique insights from growing up undiagnosed at school, and it's a really powerful presentation, so I really look forward to hearing from her later. And Christy is a popular writer in our community, and as an autistic woman has some really great wise words from her lived experience. And today she's going to share her insights with you and tips today. And she's new to our panel of speakers, so welcome Christy. Thank you for joining us. So I just wanted to also say a huge thank you to the Victorian Government and the Department of Education for their continued support. So the 6 common challenges that we'll be going through today are internalising and hidden anxiety, peer relationships, bullying and exclusion, teamwork or working collaboratively and completing tasks, executive functioning, and class rules. Our panellists will use these 6 areas and discuss their tips and strategies, which is amazing. We're really excited to hear from them. So without further ado, I will introduce you to our first speaker. Ebony. Oops, I'll show you guys those later. Ebony spoke at our last panel lunch and is back, like I said, by popular demand. She's a music teacher, neurodevelopmental therapist, education consultant, and relates to her clients through recollections of the obstacles that being on the spectrum brought her. And her number one belief is that people are only limited by the limitations placed on them by others. So let's introduce Ebony, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks again to Yellow Ladybugs for putting on this event. It's really great to be able to take it around the state and to go to different places, as Katie said. I'm going to be talking to you about 3 different areas today. So class rules, teamwork and executive functioning. So in this first time slot, I'm going to spend about 10 minutes on each of those areas, and then after lunch we'll come back and talk about more strategies with executive functioning, because that's quite a large area. So I just want to get a show of hands first. Who is a parent of a child on the spectrum? Lots of us, great. Who is a teacher or a principal or somebody working in a school? Yeah, and who's a health professional of some kind? Yeah, and a few of you might have put your hands up a couple of times, which is great as well. Okay, so first thing we're going to talk about is class rules. When we look at class rules, when I think back to myself, I often haven't responded well to authority, and I would actually often question the teachers at school on the rules. Now, I didn't do this to be disrespectful. I just processed things differently. And so I needed to actually understand why the rules were in place, and I needed to see them enforced fairly as well. I always had a mismatch between my desire to do the right thing, because I feared getting into trouble, and my need to question the rules and who actually imposed them. So when we're thinking about rules, particularly as a teacher, I encourage you to think about the who and the why. Who is getting to create the rules in the classroom? Is it just you? And if it's just you, why is it just you? So I encourage you to have your students as equals. Get them to co-create the rules in the classroom. And this goes for all children, of course, not just children on the spectrum. But have them as equals to co-create the rules. This can really assist girls on the spectrum to be more willing to follow the rules and to be more willing to actually listen to your reasons why the rules are important. And it's great to have this understanding as parents as well, because then you can support the teachers too to help your girls understand why the rules are there in the classroom. So if the girls feel like equals with valid opinions, it's going to make it much easier for them to follow the rules on a daily basis. Clarity. So when we think about rules and how we word them, it's important to be very clear and precise. So avoid idioms, avoid metaphors, and avoid figurative language. Clarity includes providing concrete examples as well. So I always know I needed a concrete example to be able to attach that rule to. I needed an explanation, a situation that could be explained to me where that rule might be relevant. So if you use idioms and metaphors and figurative language, it's not going to be as easy for you to provide a concrete example. So that's why I recommend you avoid using that type of language. Clarity doesn't just relate to the creation of the rules, it also relates to how the rules are being communicated on a daily basis. So for example, if as a teacher you say to a student, "Did you see the rest of the class put their books away?" The girl on the spectrum is likely to say, "Yeah, I did." Not realising that you're actually wanting her to follow the rule of putting her belongings away. Yep, so be clear about how you use your language, and that's relevant for the home situation as well. Consistency. It's very difficult when there's different rules across different rooms, different subjects and different teachers, and then that's different from home as well. Many people think that consistency is only important, meaning that consistency is to have the same rules all the time. Yep. But that's not necessarily the case, because girls on the spectrum will often attach rules to different things. They may attach rules to teachers, particular teachers, or to particular rooms, or to particular subjects. So for example, if the girl has one teacher for their homeroom, their main teacher, and then a different teacher comes into that same room, they may expect the same rules, because it's the same room. So the same room has to have the same rules. Yet this second teacher has a different set of rules that they use themselves. That's very confusing. Yeah. It might be that the same teacher teaches them for different subjects. So they have one teacher that has them for maths, and that same teacher has them for food technology. That can be very confusing if the same teacher has different rules for different subjects as well. So I encourage you to talk to your girls and find out what they're expecting. Do they attach rules to a teacher, or do they attach them to a room or a subject? And then you can have discussions around that with them as well. Creating rules. We can also think about rephrasing them and visually representing the rules. So rephrase them to make sure they make sense to the girls in the room. So for example, you might have a rule that says one voice at a time. This could be interpreted in many ways. I often had a voice in my own head telling me to do certain things. So to have one voice at a time was quite confusing, because if the teacher was talking, well, what was I supposed to do about the voice in my head? Was I supposed to shut it off? And how on earth did I do that? Because that meant there were two voices. So also the words "a time" could be considered vague as well. So you might like to rephrase that rule to something such as only one person in the classroom, that excludes the voice in my head, speaks at every moment. Yep. Or two people in the classroom don't speak together. at the same moment. Yep. Using drawings, using concept maps, any sort of visual representation so that the rule makes sense as well to back up the language is important. The social implications of rules. This is often things we don't think about or we're not aware about as teachers and as parents. So as I mentioned briefly before, it's been found that girls on the spectrum, and this is very true for me, often have a strong sense of right and wrong. So I always had difficulty when a child that I considered a friend broke a rule. There was this real internal struggle around, do I tell the teacher or not? Loyalty to that friend would mean that I wouldn't tell on them. But they broke a rule, so I have to tell on them because you're not allowed to break the rules. Also, the depth of the rule breaking was something that was challenging for me. So whether it was a little rule break and therefore I didn't need to tell the teacher, I could just let it go, or if it was something really important and really quite dangerous and I needed to let the teacher know. In primary school, I didn't understand the difference. I couldn't get my head around the difference between a little rule break or a substantial rule break. In high school, I was able to differentiate between the two, and that slightly helped with peer relationships because I could let some of the little things go, and therefore my friends weren't upset with them for going to the teacher about something little that they'd done. In grade 3 and 4, I had that internal struggle again around the logicalness of a consequence or the fairness or the justice. I was talking, there was a lot of us talking actually. I didn't often break rules, but this day I did. I don't quite know why. But I was talking when I shouldn't have been talking, as were a lot of people around me. The teacher had her back to us, so she couldn't see who was doing it. But then she did pick out a number of voices. I wasn't picked out. She didn't pick me out as one of the kids that was talking. But she asked, was there anybody else that was talking when they shouldn't have been? So wanting to do the right thing and confess that I broke a rule, I put my hand up and said, yes, I was talking as well. I was given 10 minutes detention, like everybody else who was talking. Now, to me, that was really unfair because I confessed, I was honest, and I owned up. So in my mind, I should have been given 5 minutes, not 10. So that really affected my relationship with the teacher because I thought I was honest and should have been rewarded for that honesty when I was actually given the same consequence as everybody else who hadn't owned up. So just be aware that there might be an internal struggle going on, and as a parent for you, be aware that things like that might have happened during the day and you might not be aware of them, and your girl may not come home and tell you, but they may be dealing with that. The last point around class rules is related to consequences. I really encourage you as teachers and as parents at home as well to pre-state your consequences. You have a list of class rules or you have a list of home rules and they might be written up somewhere. Also have a list of consequences that are written up so your girls know if I break this rule, this is what's going to happen. It's not unexpected. Also make sure your consequences are logical. So for example, picking up 10 pieces of paper in the classroom doesn't have much relationship to hurting a child in the playground or to talking over the top of a teacher. To me, a more logical link would be picking up 10 pieces of paper if I had a messy desk. That makes more sense. There's more of a relationship there. But be mindful that your consequence might not be logical to the student. So you may think a student in your classroom has a messy desk, but to that girl, their desk is organised perfectly for them the way that they need it. Yeah? So again, asking them to clean it up or giving them a consequence for having a messy desk might not be logical to them because to them their desk isn't messy. It's just the way they need it organised. There's also an emotional impact. I know I often got angry at myself for receiving a consequence. If I did somehow break a rule, which was usually unintentional, I'd have lots of negative self-talk and self-punishment for breaking that rule. I'd be really angry with myself for doing that. So be aware of that as teachers and parents as well. So if you've got any more questions about class rules, feel free to jot them down and we can come back and answer them later on in the day. Teamwork. This is huge. Huge for all children, particularly children on the spectrum and particularly girls on the spectrum because we internalise, which Chloe and Christy are going to talk about more later on. Group selection is really important. Yep. Teacher selected versus self-selected. Often as a teacher, and I know because I was a teacher myself in classrooms for many years, you just select the groups because it's just quicker and it's just easier to do it. Yep. That's okay if you need to have teacher selected groups, but explain to the girl on the spectrum why you need to have the group selected as you've done it. Why does she need to be in that group with those people? I'd also encourage you, though, to allow her to self-select her group so that she can choose to be with people she feels comfortable with. That will greatly reduce the anxiety she has about working in a group. Consistency is important as well, consistency over time. So I know as teachers, we often really like for students to work with different children in the classroom so they can develop new peer relationships and get used to working with different personalities. Yes, that's important. But if you're changing the group on the child every single time there's a group activity, huge anxiety. Because when you say we're doing group work today, that girl has no idea who's going to be in her group. Yep. So what I would do when I was a teacher in a classroom, I would say, these are your groups for the next 3 weeks, for example. Every time we do a group task, these are the people that are going to be in your group, so that girl then knows for those 3 weeks she's got the same people, she can feel a little bit more comfortable. And then you warn her that now for the next 3 groups you're going to have a different group. Yeah? Also ensure that groups are pre-arranged so that you don't have girls missing out and not being picked and not being selected and being the last one in the room standing there by herself because the students have chosen their own groups and she gets left. So having pre-arranged groups is important as well. Roles. Self-selected roles. So again, group work can be really challenging. So by giving the girls a chance to choose their own role in the group, are they going to be the leader? Are they going to be the speaker? Are they going to be the timekeeper? Are they going to be the note taker? Allow them to choose their own roles within the group. That allows them to use their strengths first and focus on their strengths. Use role cards so that it gives the girl a clear understanding of what her role is and what she needs to do when she's playing that role. Again, as teachers, we want students to develop skills in lots of different areas and we want them to have a go at all roles at some point in time. So start with the strengths first. Allow the girl to self-select and begin with her strengths first and then get her to move on to the roles that are more challenging for her. Warn her when her role needs to be changed. Okay, you're no longer the timekeeper anymore. Tomorrow when you come in and do group work, you're going to have a different role. And then spend time with her, pre-preparing and teaching her. And communicate with the parents. So parents, this is great for you. If you know students are doing lots of group work in the classroom, go to your child's teacher. Ask them, what roles will my child have within the groups? Can you explain to me how she needs to do that role so I can role play with her at home and prepare her for that at home? That's a really great thing to do as a parent. When we're working in the group, what do we want to think about? Time limits. So you may say that the girl needs to work in the group just for 5 minutes, or just for 10 minutes, or just for 15, rather than having no time frame and she's anxious that she might be stuck in this group for the next hour. Yeah? Warn them when the group is coming up. So as a teacher, I would always make sure that if I was doing group work that day, I told the student, particularly the girls on the spectrum, as soon as they walked in the door that morning, I would say, after lunch, we're going to be doing group work. I wouldn't spring it on them 5 minutes before we were about to do it. That gives them time to process it, and it also gives you time to have discussions with them around any anxiety they might be having and support them before they get to the group work stage. Look at group work versus solitary work. Once a girl has been involved in lots of group work, she may need some time on her own just doing an individual quiet activity by herself. So it's important to give her that. And look at alternatives as well. So sometimes if the child is anxious about working in a group, you can get them to do something on their own. It can still be for the group, but they don't have to work with the group to do it. So they can be working on a task for the group over there on their own by themselves, and then they come back to report to the rest of the group 20 minutes later, for example. Alternatives also include giving them options to not always do a group project, and I would do this for the whole class. Yep. So sometimes there might be projects that you want done in a group, but always, when you can, give your students an option. Would you like to do it in a group? Great, go and find yourself 3 friends. Would you like to do it by yourself? Great, that's absolutely fine as well. And as parents too, I'd encourage you to speak to your teachers and give them these options and give them these tips. If your daughter's teacher isn't here, you've now got the information to go and share with them. Accepting group decisions. This was really hard for me, really, really hard. This was my biggest area of struggle. I had a clear idea of what I wanted to do, but everybody else had a different idea, and that was a challenge for me. So when I thought about, what tips can I give teachers and parents around this? I thought about what would have helped me if I'd got support. So I had no support through primary school, high school, university. I wasn't diagnosed till I was 28. So nobody thought there was any reason to actually give me any support, so I got none throughout my schooling. So what would have assisted me would have been a choice of what to let go. So for example, if there were 4 decisions being made by the group, if I didn't agree with 3 of them, someone could have supported me to say, okay, which one can you let go of? And then you can negotiate the other 2. And then I could have thought, okay, I'll make a choice. I'm happy to let go of this one as long as I can have input in those other 2. It also would have helped me to have processing time. So once a decision had been made that I didn't agree with, I really would have benefited from 5 or 10 minutes over there by myself to process that decision before I came back to start work with the group. Taking turns being the leader as well. I was always the leader. And teachers just thought, oh my gosh, this girl's amazing. She's got such great leadership skills. I sort of did, but a lot of it was more to do with the control. I needed to control. It allowed me to develop great leadership skills as I went through school because I was given leadership opportunities, which was excellent. But a lot of it was the need and the desire to control what was going on. So if somebody had have talked to me and said, you get to be the leader for 15 minutes, but when these 15 minutes are up, it's your turn now to sit back and listen to the rest of the group. You don't have to agree with what they're saying, but you need to sit and listen because you're no longer the leader after that 15-minute time slot. That would have helped me and I could have done that. Being individually graded as well as having a group grading. So you might have, okay, this group you get a 40 out of 50, for example. I wasn't happy with a 40 out of 50. I wanted the 50 out of 50, or a 49 at least. Yeah? So if I had have known that I would have received an individual grade for my effort, that would have reduced a lot of anxiety. So there was a situation at uni, and I've told this story a number of times now, where we had a particular group assignment. There were 8 of us involved in the assignment, and we all had a different component to work on. Somebody in the group volunteered that if we all sent them our component, they would put it all together and put it onto the one USB ready to submit to the lecturer. The night before it was ready to submit, the person who'd collated it all for us sent it out to everyone just to have a look at it. Well, I spent about 3 or 4 hours into the early hours of that morning editing everybody else's work and redoing it. Because I knew that if we handed that in, we weren't going to receive a very good grade. There were spelling errors throughout, there were grammatical errors throughout, there were paragraphs that just didn't make sense. So I went to my group the next morning. The person who collated had the the USB, ready to submit, and I turned up with my own USB and said, we're submitting this one instead. And everybody else said, but why? It's been collated, we've checked it. I said, did you check it, really? Because there's lots of errors. And I just said to them, look, just trust me, I've gotten really great grades all throughout uni. You know I have, because a lot of them, had worked with me before. I said, we're going to get a high distinction if we submit this USB. That's not going to happen if we submit this one. Yeah. I now understand that wasn't the way to go about it, and I've learnt since then. But because I didn't have any support around doing that beforehand, nobody gave me those social skills supports, I thought that was an okay thing to do. Needless to say, I have no friends from my university years, unfortunately. But if I was to do that again, I would know to do things differently. I would be able to talk to them differently about it. But as I say, if I had have had the option to, okay, your group might get a C for this, but you get an A for your effort, I would have been happy with that. Yeah. Also important to let your students and your girls know grades aren't everyone. I wish someone had have told me that years ago. Nobody did. I now know they're not the be-all and end-all. The last point around teamwork is processing and communication. So give your girls time to process. and communicate with others in the group. Having non-verbal ways to communicate is great. Yeah? So sticky notes up on a board, having a notebook that they can write to their group members, being able to email their group members without having to verbally communicate with them can be really useful. Yeah? Also consider the group size. Working in a smaller group will limit anxiety. It will also limit the challenges girls will have with auditory processing. Yeah, lots of girls on the spectrum, most girls on the spectrum have auditory processing challenges, so working in a large group is really difficult. And also use visual summaries at the end to keep track of where the group is up to and where it's going next. Okay, executive functioning. 30 for the first. Okay. All right, executive functioning, sorry, just timekeeping here. So executive functioning is controlled primarily by the prefrontal regions of the frontal lobe, and they are not mature until over 20 years of age. So all of your daughters and the students that you're working with don't have mature executive functioning yet, and that's just part of typical development. Executive functioning is wired differently though in those with autism. Autism does not cause difficulties with executive functioning, and executive functioning difficulties don't cause autism either. But it's just the way that the brain is wired that causes the executive functioning challenges, and that is what likely contributes to behaviours that lead an individual to being given an autism diagnosis. So I'll just read you a quote from Positive Partnerships. Executive functions are a set of cognitive skills that are used for both planning and carrying out tasks and organising and regulating behaviour over time. So here are all the components of executive functioning up there, and I've colour-coded them to give you an idea of what executive functioning can look like in an individual. So this is my executive functioning up here. The green areas are my areas of strength. The yellow are the areas that sometimes I do well with, sometimes not so well. And the red are my real areas of need in executive functioning. And as we go through, I'll explain to you how that impacts functioning and social interaction and academics. So what are the impacts of executive functioning challenges? They may not be as obvious in the early and primary school years, and this was certainly the case for me with my own awareness as well. In primary school and even in early high school, I just did what I had to do to get the task done. But I wasn't actually really aware of what was going on, and I wasn't aware of what my executive functioning needs were. That didn't happen until mid to late high school, and then certainly in university I was well aware of my own needs. I knew exactly the process I would go through every time I did an assignment, and that's when I was able to start developing my own strategies for myself to help myself overcome those challenges. So the increasing demands of schooling in the upper years is what makes it more obvious, and that's more likely when the executive challenging functions come through in the academic world. Executive functioning does not just affect academics and schoolwork though. That's a misconception. It also affects social interactions. So response inhibition, one element of executive functioning, flexibility, another element, and emotional control greatly impact social interactions. Executive functioning also contributes to repetitive behaviours, and lots of people out there and lots of the research says that the repetitive behaviours we see in autism are due to challenges with executive functioning. Do you want me to leave it there? I've just got a couple more slides, yeah? Okay. I'll go through these and then we will move on to our next speaker. So here's the elements of executive functioning: task initiation, time management, sustained attention, and goal direction. Yep. So task initiation for me, huge challenge. That's why it's up there in red. So I have real difficulties getting started on the task, just beginning it. Yep. Also have huge challenges manipulating word counts in an assignment, and that's all related to task initiation. Time management relates to prioritising and allocating your time for subcomponents of each task. Sometimes I do okay with that, sometimes it's a challenge. Sustained attention means, can the girl stay on task? Can they complete the work? Can they organise and sequence their thoughts? When you have challenges with sustained attention, it means you often forget where you're up to within the task or within the project. But I am very goal-directed, and I want to get things done, and I want to get them done on time. So that goal direction helps me to overcome my challenges with the task initiation. That's what eventually gets me started, because it just has to be done by this due date. And that helps me to time manage, and it helps me to sustain my attention, because I'm driven by the fact that it just needs to get finished. Working memory, emotional control, and metacognition. So when you have challenges with working memory, I have big challenges in this area, I need to reread everything over and over again. I go back and forth between different sources. It means I'm very slow with my task completion. It means I forget where I'm up to. I have trouble remembering all of the information I've read from different sources and integrating it to form concepts. I have difficulties with proofreading, because I forget what I'm actually looking for. Sorting through all of the information and highlighting key information. That's all a real challenge. Then we go on to emotional control, which is related to managing frustration, managing overwhelm, and being able to sequence my thoughts. But I have great metacognition now, didn't when I was younger, which means I am very aware of what I'm doing. I'm very aware of my own process. So my metacognition actually helps me to overcome my challenges in those other areas. It allows me to proofread, it allows me to sequence my thoughts eventually, because I can work out what I'm actually doing and where I'm up to in my process. And the last slide, flexibility. Again, huge area of challenge for me. I like to do things the same way every time, because I'm a perfectionist. Yep, absolute perfectionist. I now know that perfectionism isn't helpful, and I'm working really hard to change that within myself. Revising plans as I'm working through a project, that's really difficult, because I don't like to revise. I like to just stick to the same thing, and it's very difficult for me to adapt to new ways of doing things. Response inhibition is another element of executive functioning. Makes it difficult for me to keep to the word counts. I always go thousands of words over a word count, and then I spend days and weeks cutting it all out again. Yeah? But I'm very good at planning, and I'm very good at organisation. And that allows me to revise my plans as I go through. It allows me to highlight my key information. It allows me to maintain my notes and keep my belongings organised. So that gives you an idea of how strengths in executive functioning can help you overcome challenges in the other area. So thank you, and I'll be back to talk to you later on about some strategies.
A lot of information there, so useful. We are recording today's session, so I know many of you were feverishly writing down notes, but you'll be able to watch it back as well, and hopefully share it to whoever you think needs to hear this, because it's great information. So glad you're here to share this. And I dream of a world where our individual learning plans actually identify these areas and include strategies specific to our girls. I love how you've colour-coded that, and I would love to work out. I'm going to have to ask your help for that. Major executive functioning issues here, our whole family. So now I'd love to introduce you to our next speaker, Chloe. Chloe is a Yellow Ladybugs ambassador, like I've explained, and is an amazing blogger on YouTube. If you haven't looked her up, I definitely recommend looking her up and sharing it with your ladybug in your life, because she's a great role model as well. And later we'll be showing you a video that we've done with Chloe called This Is Me, which is very empowering for our girls, and we can get tissues out for that one. You might need them for Chloe's talk now, so please join me in welcoming Chloe.
Hi everyone. As Katie said, my name's Chloe, and I want to talk to you guys a little bit today, specifically about what it means to be different, about how some people who are different work, and eye sparkles. We can't forget eye sparkles. So, and if you guys don't know what that is yet, you haven't heard me talk, you'll learn soon. So I want to tell you guys a little bit about me first, because I know if I was sitting down where you are, I'd be really confused and really stressed out having someone speak to me knowing nothing about them. So as a little overview, my name's Chloe. I am 21 years old. I live in a small town just outside of Geelong with my family and my many animals. I love singing and acting and dancing, although I'm not very good at the last one. I love reading, horses, Disney, and I'm obsessed with One Direction. I know I live in 2012 and I look like a 12-year-old, so it works. And I'm also autistic. So as a brief overview, autism for me, and the way that I describe autism to a lot of kids, and honestly a lot of adults as well, is that it feels like you're living on an alien planet. Imagine that you have crash landed onto this planet and the people who sent you here haven't given you a handbook of how it's supposed to work. The people on this planet talk really loudly and they say weird things that don't make sense, like it's raining cats and dogs. You have no idea how upset I was when I realised that wasn't an actual thing. You're laughing, but I was crying. The lights on this planet are very noisy and people interact in really strange, off-putting ways. It's kind of like the rocket scientists back home left you there without any explanation, without any handbooks, and you have to work it out by yourself. That's what autism is for me, and I know there's a lot of autistic women in this room. I don't know if that's what it's like for you, but autism for every single person is different, and that's how I describe it for me. So let's get started. So something that I'm obsessed with, like I just said, is Disney. It is my favourite thing in the entire world. I have a fish called Mushu, like from Mulan. I have a mouse called Gus Gus, like from Cinderella. I have a pony called Princess, which kind of, speaks for itself. I'm obsessed with Disney, so it would make sense that I would base this talk off of Disney movies. And also, if anyone ever tells you that you're too old for Disney movies, they're wrong and you don't need that sort of negativity in your life. So I'm going to assume that we've all seen our fair share of fairy tales. You don't have to blame it on your children. We're allowed to still like fairy tales. And every single person knows what every single fairy tale starts off with. Once upon a time. And a beginning that's not so great. Because if you don't start down here, there's no journey to get up here. And something that I found is that sometimes the journey is the coolest part, even if it's the hardest. So who knows the story of the Lion King? You guys are so much less interactive than children. Great, thank you. So in The Lion King, we meet Simba, and at the start of his journey, he's going to be the king of Pride Rock. He spends his days with Nala and his dad, and he's living the best life a kid could have. But then his dad is killed, and he's thrown out. He's an outcast. He's not off to a great start. The second movie I want to bring up is Aladdin. Who's seen that one? Cool. So in Aladdin, I don't want to talk about the main character, which you would expect. I want to talk about the genie. Because when you see the genie, he seems like this crazy, awesome, full of life, bubbly character. But he's been trapped inside of a glass bottle for 10,000 years. He's not off to a great start. The third movie I want to talk about is one that's a little bit more obscure, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. In this movie, we meet Quasimodo, who is a hunchback who is treated awfully because of the way that he looks like, because of something that he can't change. People yell at him and spit at him in the street and tell him bad things, and he's locked away because he's not allowed to be who he is. He's not allowed to be who he was born to be. He's not off to a great start. The fourth fairy tale that I want to bring up is one that I hope none of you, except possibly my mum, have seen because it's my own story. I grew up surrounded by an amazing family, living an amazing life. I had the coolest things. I had every single thing a kid could ever ask for. But the start of my fairy tale, it had a deeper meaning. It wasn't as pretty as it looked on the outside, as nice as it looked on first glance. I struggled a lot. I had a lot of trouble making friends growing up. I remember when I was in prep, I was really, really struggling with friends. So my parents thought it would be a great idea to host this big Christmas party where they invited every single child from my year level, plus all of the teachers. And to bribe them into coming, they bought them like Barbie dolls for the girls and like action men for the boys, and had this extravagant party, like Santa came and everything. And it was cool, everyone showed up. But the next day at school, none of them spoke to me. For my 8th birthday, the same thing happened. I didn't have many friends, and the couple of girls who I thought were my friends, I invited them to my birthday party, and I think Mum and Dad knew something I didn't, because they hired this limousine to pick every single one up from their house just so they would come. And they all came, because who would, not want to go on a limousine? And the next day, none of them spoke to me at school again. Every friendship I ever had was short-lived. School life was pretty similar. I was always that weird kid, that different kid. And I remember growing up, my parents always told me that you're perfect the way you're meant to be, and that it's okay that you're, a little bit unique, a little bit quirky, a little bit different, because that's what kids are meant to be. Unfortunately, kids don't tend to think the same way. I was bullied a lot growing up, particularly starting year 7, because I feel like in primary school, kids are meant to be kids. Kids are meant to be different. Kids are meant to be a little bit weird. That's the way kids are. But when you're in year 7, when you're in high school, something changes, and for some reason different is suddenly not so cool and not wanted. I suffered an eating disorder from the ages of 12 up until 20, and it nearly killed me several times. My life wasn't off to a great start. In my fairy tale, I wasn't the princess with the long blonde hair, and I wasn't the cool, brave hero character who had a pet dragon, and I wasn't the lion cub. I was the toad. I was the Quasimodo. I was that little lion cub. Or I guess in better terms, I was like the antelope that the lion cub would eat. My fairy tale wasn't off to a great start. But then we get on to stage 2 of the fairy tale, the adventure stage, because the biggest thing that I've learned from Disney movies is that when you think that the ending is coming and it's still not up here, your ending isn't anywhere near yet. Every single fairy tale has to go through a bad start so they can get to their fairy tale ending. And also, there's usually a really, really cool sidekick. So let's have a look at Simba. He was thrown out of Pride Rock. He lost his dad. His uncle was this creep. He lost everything he knew. But just when he thought that was his end, just when he thought that the book was closing on his fairy tale, he met 2 new friends in the form of Timon and Pumbaa. He met these 2 crazy, lovable, goofy guys who live their life not only knowing that they're different, but being okay with it and celebrating it. There's an entire song about it. It would have been so easy for Timon and Pumbaa to say to Simba to work hard and train hard and be this king that he was supposed to be. It would have been so easy for them to either leave him to die or to go, you know what, cough it up, do better, do what you're meant to do. But they didn't. They accepted that he was an outcast and accepted him for who he was. They didn't try to change him. Because of these 2 people, Simba's life started to get better. In the story of Aladdin, the genie had begun to accept that he was a prisoner. He had begun to accept that he would never be free, that this is who he was and this is who he would always be. Now, I don't know about any of you, but I know that I have felt like a prisoner before. And I know that there has been so many times in my life where I have felt like that trapped genie. And then we get to Quasimodo's story. In Quasimodo's story, we meet Esmeralda, who's a gypsy girl who lives in the town where Quasimodo lives. And she shows Quasimodo kindness. She shows him acceptance. And it's the first person who's ever done it for him. As she wanders through the church where Quasimodo lives, she sings this song. God help the outcasts, the tattered, the torn, seeking an answer to why they were born. Winds of misfortune have cast them about. God made the outcasts, don't cast them out. Now, I remember when I was a kid, I used to sing this song at the top of my lungs, and I was selectively mute. I didn't talk to anyone except my pet horse. And I would scream this song out wherever I was, whenever, it didn't matter. And I would sing it with tears running down my face. And I never knew why, and I never knew why it meant so much to me until maybe a couple of years ago when I was watching the movie again and it clicked. I was that outcast. I felt like Quasimodo did, and all I wanted was an Esmeralda. all I wanted was for someone to show me that it was okay to be who I was, to love me and accept me for who I was, because yes, my parents did it, but parents love you no matter what. Sometimes you just want someone who isn't part of your family. Sometimes you just want people to accept you as you are. I felt like an outcast, and all I wanted in my life was for one person that wasn't my mum or my dad or my horse to treat me like I was like everyone else. In the adventure stage of my fairy tale, the realization set in that I was different and that it wasn't a bad thing. And that's when my mum decided that there was no need in trying to make me fit in, to make me happy. There was no need in trying to fit in, because fitting in wasn't making me happy. It was doing the exact opposite. Mum had spoken about homeschooling, and Dad's concerns were the social aspects of it. But the first step was to seek help and to find an understanding as to why I felt like this. That's when we started the journey of getting a diagnosis, and while that diagnosis was a short journey, I still remember sitting in the office with Mum and Dad when they said this one word that would change my life forever: asparagus. I remember sitting in that office and I was confused, because my mum's not going to want me to say this because she's sitting in the room right now, but she cried. And when you're a kid, especially I think I was 12, and when you're a 12-year-old and your parents start crying, you know something's up, because parents are meant to be the strong ones, and when they cry, you know that the whole world's falling apart. And I thought that's what was happening. I was scared because I had never heard of this word before, except when I was having roast vegetables. And I didn't know what it meant. But it didn't take long for myself and my mum and everyone who surrounded me to understand that this word, asparagus, Asperger's, whatever it is that you want to call it, that it didn't change anything. I hadn't just been given this terminal diagnosis. Something hadn't just been put onto me. I'd always been like this, and now there was a reasoning behind it. But on a good note, it was my last day of school. I didn't ever have to go back. I didn't even have to go back and pick my books up. I didn't have to see anyone again. And for the first time, I started to feel like I was myself. Not being at school and not having to continuously focus on the lights and the sounds and the people talking and the classrooms and the different structures, and not having to focus all of my attention on trying to be normal, and finally getting to focus on being me, I began to discover who me actually was. As a kid and as a young teenager, I didn't really have any passions or loves or interests. I didn't have things that made me excited because I was so focused on putting every single bit of my energy into being accepted, and that's not a good thing for a kid. I had my horses and I loved my horses, but even then, when you have so much energy being put into trying to be normal, into trying to be someone you're not, into trying to understand how this crazy world works, even the things that you do love die off. When I started getting homeschooled and when I was put out of this environment where I was so awfully treated, those loves that I had began to form again. Like I said before, my dad was really, he was unsure about social groups, and he was like, well, she's so unsocial at the moment, how is she going to be social now? And the answer to that is, because I know that a lot of parents think the same thing, and the answer to that is, I'm not socialising at school. It's the exact opposite. When I was taken out of school, I went to pony club and I went to church youth groups and I went surfing and I went to horse competitions. And in those groups, I found like-minded people who didn't care about all of these other things because we had connections. We had something we were related to, which I guess is the same as Yellow Ladybugs. All of these kids here have something that they can relate to. They have something, they go, I'm like this person, and they hold on to that. And that is so important for a kid to have. I started horse riding again, and I found friendship groups in the most unlikely places, including, and probably the one that helped me the most, but it's also probably the most embarrassing, in the One Direction fandom. You're laughing now, but no, actually no, you're still going to be laughing anyway, never mind. So I created a blog on the internet, and I know that a lot of girls on the spectrum particularly do this, where they will find friendship groups on the internet because they can find people that they relate to better there, I guess, especially in our chosen interests, in our fandoms. I know there's like girls on the spectrum who might like Doctor Who, or who might like another boy band, who might like, I don't know, there's so many different fandoms, right? Anyway, mine was One Direction, and I started making blog posts and writing these dumb stories, which are gone from the internet forever now. And because of this, and because of letting myself out there in a way where I wasn't, oh, that weird girl. Oh, she's not that girl who's a little bit quirky. She's not that girl who's a little bit weird. I was just Chloe. And people started to accept who that was. And I was like, hey, that's kind of cool. I began to see what my future could be after that. I began to write blog posts, and I started to create videos, and I saw kids that were hurting. I saw that I could write blog posts that weren't just about boy bands. I could write blog posts that could help people, because I found that it also helped me. I saw kids that were different, and I wanted to make them understand that different wasn't bad, that different doesn't mean less. I began to stop thinking about these silly things that I couldn't do, like read a clock or eat red food, and I started to think about these really cool opportunities that I had in front of me. But enough about that, because the coolest part of any single fairy tale is finding out the happy ending. So, because of a fat warthog, a sassy meerkat, and an enthusiastic old monkey that all showed Simba that he was worth so much more than what he had been told out throughout his entire childhood, he had the self-strength and the courage and the acceptance to go back to Pride Rock. He became the king of all of Africa. Can you imagine how Timon and Pumbaa felt when they saw him standing on top of Pride Rock, knowing that they were the ones that helped to push and motivate him? Because of a kind homeless boy, the loud, crazy genie got his number one wish. He was free. He wasn't a prisoner anymore. And Quasimodo, after 20 years of being hidden away from society, the city accepts him for who he is, the same way that Esmeralda did. Because of the love that they show him, he begins to grow more confident. He's happy, he's independent, he's confident, he manages to find love, he's different, but he's accepted. Not only by the city, but most importantly, by himself. Now, I want to stop there for a second, because something that I think is really important is don't be too quick to knock off the Timon and Pumbaas. Don't be too quick to knock off the homeless Aladdin, and don't think that Esmeralda is too pretty to help. We have opposite sides. We have a warthog and we have a beautiful princess. The sidekick can make all the difference in that character's fairy tale. I know that there's some teachers in this room and some health professionals and some people that work with a lot of kids. Who's that kid at school who jokes around and doesn't care and just wants to have fun? Who's that honest kid who wants to free people? Who's that beautiful princess who sees the good in everyone? They're out there, and you just need to find them. I guarantee that there's people that are in this room right now who has got a kid in mind, who is thinking of someone right now who goes, right, that's this sidekick who is going to help this person in their fairy tale. Every single person has the ability to be a Timon or an Aladdin or an Esmeralda. But it is important that we don't leave it all to the sidekick, that we don't leave it all to the Timon and the Pumbaa. Sometimes we have to let the lionesses take over. Aladdin and Jasmine and like, for example, Aladdin had Jasmine and Abu, Esmeralda had the entire town. While Timon and Pumbaa were able to help, and Aladdin was able to help, and Esmeralda was able to help, their lives were so much better because of what Simba did, and the genie did, and Quasimodo did. My step 3 is that I now know who I am, and I'm not afraid of it. My step 3 is not only accepting myself for who I am, but embracing myself for who I am. I went from being this kid who couldn't speak in school for the life of me. I would go, like Katie said with her kids, I would go to the bathroom and I would vomit for constantly because I was so scared of what people were thinking. I was so scared of what was happening. I was so full of anxiety. I would fake being sick just so I didn't have to get on that school bus. I went from being this kid who was horrified at the thought of being at school to being this, I'm still calling myself a kid because the word woman is scary. I'm this girl who now goes out and talks to these people and goes to these schools now and talks to these people. I'm like, wow, I was terrified of you. On this journey, I've noticed that there are so many people out there who are different, and that it's really, really cool. I started to write about not just One Direction, but I started to write about myself, and I started to write about what was happening in my head. And the cool thing is, these people started to write back as well. And that's how I knew that there was this thing called eye sparkles. I had people telling me that they were obsessed with things. I didn't see them as obsessions, I saw them as eye sparkles. People that were obsessed with drawing or obsessed with some sort of, like One Direction, who knows? And that's when I realized that this wasn't a disability, that autism isn't a disability. It's an eye sparkle. It's something to be encouraged, and it's something to be proud of. And that's when I started to look for more eye sparkles. And that's when I created Princess Aspian. The thing is, every single one of us are different. We are all facing different struggles every single day, and every single one of us is going through a different challenge. I know people that don't have mums or dads. I have 2 siblings that are adopted who have had to move country. I know people that have braces or glasses or who can't read properly or write properly. I know people that have hard times finding jobs. There are so many different people out there who are going through so many different things, and every single one of us are different. Maybe you're autistic, and every single one of them are okay. The thing is, we're all different, and that's what makes the world so beautiful, because if we're all the same, the world would be really boring and bland and colourless, and I think you can probably tell that I don't want to live in a world like that. I don't think any of us do. As the Lion King says, we have to put our past behind us. If we only look at the bad side of different, Simba never would have gone back to Pride Rock and become king. The genie never would have become free. I wouldn't be standing here. I wouldn't be Princess Aspian. I wouldn't be making YouTube videos and traveling Australia and talking to kids and talking to adults. I wouldn't be living my dream if I had only looked at the bad side of different. I'm 21 years old now, and I am living out my Disney fairy tale. I get to make movies and be on YouTube. I get to meet my favourite celebrities. I've met Niall Horan 3 times, just so you know. I get to live the most amazing, cool life. I get to travel around Victoria and speak at events like this and speak to people like you guys, because I understand that different doesn't mean less. As I'm finishing up, there's one thing that I want you guys to remember. Embrace who you are. Find your support group, and if you have girls on the spectrum, Yellow Ladybugs is the perfect one. You're welcome. Be honest about who you are. Find your eye sparkle, and if you have a child that has an eye sparkle, help them find it, because I promise you, it is there. Understand that different doesn't mean and will never mean less. There's one quote that I want to go out with, and this is surprisingly not from a Disney movie, but it's a movie that means the world to me, and that there should be theme parks dedicated to it, and I don't know why people aren't speaking about it all the time. And the movie is Mr. Megorium's Wonder Emporium, and there's a quote from this movie which I live my life by, and I want to go out with this, and I want you guys to listen to it and think about it and really just dig it down into you, because it's really important. Your life is an occasion. Rise to it. Thank you.
I still cry every time I hear that. Happy tears, sad tears. It's amazing. Such a beautiful story. Thank you so much for sharing it with us, Chloe. And I do love what you say. Let's make unique the norm. And we need to make sure we do that everywhere. Great. Thank you so much, Chloe. All right. So we'll talk more about that, and thank you for sharing your journey, because we don't want school to be somewhere where you can't go and feel celebrated, and that's what we're trying to do to change for the next generation, so that there are choices and we don't feel like we have to homeschool. There should be the right to make that choice. So thanks for that feedback. Okay, Christy. I can't wait to introduce you to Christy. She's, as I said, a really popular writer, and she's got experience in primary and secondary teaching, early childhood education, psychology, and as a woman diagnosed at 33 years old, and she's also a parent of autistic children, she's going to have some really good insights for you today. So please join me in welcoming Christy.
Hi, I just want to announce that I'm really anxious because that will make me feel better about being anxious. So, thank you for the introduction. I'm going to be talking about internalising and hidden anxiety because I think we have this idea that anxiety is something that's really obvious when you look at a person, but you can actually see a person like me, and I'm often told I come across as really confident, but inside I'm a little bit like, don't hurt me. Okay. So we've already talked about this. This is just my background. I am the mum of 4 autistic daughters, ranging from 4 years old to 21 years old. And this is my beautiful family. We are all autistic in my family, and we're all happy and thriving. And we embrace autism as an identity and a culture. We don't view it as a disorder, so it works really well for us. So I want to talk a little bit about masking to begin. So this is something that's commonly spoken about in the autistic community, and masking is when we make attempts to fit in with people. And what that means is that I would be suppressing parts of my normal autistic self. So I didn't know I was autistic until I was 33, and I don't think that really made a difference, to be honest, about whether I masked or not. I think that everybody masks to some degree, but as I got older, masking became something that I put a lot of time and energy into. So I would analyse the way people moved their heads when they spoke, their facial expressions, the clothes they wore, things they would say in social groups. And I'd really pay close attention to the people that were received really well by others. So if they were popular, I'd make them secretly, my mentor. So I would take pieces of other people and I'd create my own persona from those bits and pieces that I studied. I just want to start by saying I am a child fashion victim of the 80s. So when you see my haircuts, just blame my mum. So this is me and my mum on my 5th birthday. I started school when I was 5, and I still remember the first day of school. Mum was taking a photo and I was sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. I had my school uniform on and my backpack on, and she was trying to get me really excited. But I was so anxious about leaving my safety net and going somewhere that was just completely foreign to me. I think my greatest memories of prep were the carpet, the tabletop, the concrete, because my body would physically freeze. I couldn't speak, I couldn't get my words out, I couldn't think. I did not know what was going on around me because the anxiety would freeze me to the point where everything outside in my peripheral vision would be black. So I could hear something like I was underwater, and nothing could bring me out of that. Asking for help was not something that I would do because it would make me vulnerable, it would make me seen and heard, and that didn't feel safe for me as a child. My teacher really had no clue whether I was intelligent or not because I couldn't express that because I wouldn't engage in schoolwork because it meant having to move my body, having to look up from the ground, having to walk across the room, and I just couldn't bring myself to do those things. So I want to talk about something that I've always been severely impacted by. I know we talk a lot about sensory integration and sensory input. I'm a person with sensory processing disorder, so I don't receive sensory input the same way that other people do, and I can feel absolutely bombarded by it, and I didn't know that until a few years ago. So I've been surviving it basically. But something we don't talk about enough is the input from the energies of other people. So I'm a very sensitive person around other people. Even when I'm comfortable, the presence that a person brings around me is something that I take on. And I know that this has been called being empathic at times, and people might think, oh, it sounds like a woo-woo anti-science idea, but I want to talk about this because it's very, very real for me. If there's an angry person in a room, whether I know them or not, I internalise their anger and I feel responsible for it. And as a child, this was absolutely debilitating. I would blame myself for other people's emotional experiences and states of being. And even when a person was experiencing joy and happiness and they were around me, that energy from their happiness felt chaotic and unstable and scary. And it felt like a threat to my safety and my immediate environment. So in a classroom full of 5-year-old children, that was a very real and scary thing. Again, mullet haircut, cut by my mother, and I was sure to tell the teachers that too. So we moved on from my original school and we moved town, and our extended family lived there and my auntie was a secretary at the new school. So that made a huge difference for me because I saw a familiar face and I was able to relax more into who I was. At the other school, I ended up running away every day and hiding behind a building, and nobody knew. My teacher didn't even notice that I wasn't in the classroom for days on end. I'd get dropped off, I'd hide behind a building, and when I knew that parents were turning up, I'd come back around. And it was never questioned, it was never talked about, I'm not even sure if my mum knows. So when we moved schools, I relaxed a bit, but I became really aware of my difference. And I became aware because I'd listened to conversations that my peers were having, and I felt that I was much older and more insightful. And it's not an ego-based thing, it's just that I knew I thought differently about people and serious issues, and I was really interested in what was going on in the world, and my peers weren't like that. So that was a very isolating experience. Comprehension and understanding for me was difficult because, again, the energy of all my classmates constantly surrounding me, and even when I was comfortable, I was so distracted by what everybody else was doing that I had no idea what the teacher was talking about, what they were asking us to do. So I'd wing it, I'd do a bit of work, and I had strategies that I would use so the teachers would never check on my work or never come over and ask me what I was up to, because I knew how to blend in such a way that I could get away with not knowing what was going on. My executive functioning, oh gosh. Yeah, it was a problem. Seriously. When you're coupling not being able to manage time or remember to pack things into your bag, and I was raised in a family where independence was strongly encouraged, and I failed at it all the time because I just couldn't remember anything. But then when I did engage in schoolwork, I was so focused on what I was doing, I would panic about the time restraints on how long I had to get an activity done. So if I had something to do and I was told you've got 10 minutes to do it, major anxiety for me because I like to put everything I have into what I'm doing. And being interrupted from that or having a teacher say, okay, time to move on to the next thing, was like ripping my arms off. I'd be so devastated that I could not complete the task. That's me as a teenager, standing on the table if you don't hardly mind. Going into year 7, I thought, this is a brand new start. I have an opportunity here to be a completely different person. There'll be new people, lots of people that don't know me, and I can recreate who I am. I could even be popular. So I tried to look really cool. I did look really cool. Well, I think I did. But the problem with what I was observing was students that were considered unruly, misbehaved, and that's what happened for me. So I became a student that was constantly put in isolation, on conduct cards, on behavioural modification programs. My parents were constantly called into the school. So I went from one extreme to another. And the thing about being that child or that teenager was that it provided me a sense of protection. Other kids wouldn't bully me because they were frightened of me. Everybody thought I was a bit cool because I said what I thought and I did what I wanted. So it was like a form of survival for me, being that child. Underneath all of that, I was suffering, absolutely suffering. I had an eating disorder, I had hormonal imbalances, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, so I was out of my mind for 3 weeks of the month. I had other health issues and comorbidities that weren't being seen to because I wouldn't ask for help. I was constantly burnt out and exhausted from being somebody that I wasn't, and in the end, I'd only show up for school a couple of days a week. My mum worked 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, so she didn't know. And I ended up having weeks on end off school, and nobody would call, nobody would ask where I was. I don't think I was very missed. The sad part about all of this was that the focus was on my behaviour. Nobody actually looked beyond my behaviour and questioned why I would go from being a child who couldn't speak to being somebody who was so poorly behaved. I didn't have anybody ask me why, what was going on, was there any way they could help me. I was just reprimanded and punished and corrected, and it didn't help at all. It just really reaffirmed my need to behave that way. I was sent off to boarding school for 6 months, and it improved my academic performance and my behaviour, but I couldn't cope outside my home environment, so I came home. I ended up leaving school at 15 and not completing my secondary education. I failed all the way through school. When I came out of school, masking had gifted me with poor mental health outcomes. I had an absolute identity crisis because I had no idea who I was or why I was different or why I felt the need to be someone I wasn't. It interrupted the development of who I'm supposed to be. So I knew the whole time, I knew I was intelligent. I knew that I had these amazing strengths, but it was never safe to talk about them or have anybody see them. And I didn't want anybody to have expectations of me because I was afraid I wouldn't be able to rise to them. I couldn't connect with people authentically, so all of my friendships were really fake because they were in a relationship with someone who they thought I was, but I wasn't that person. So I didn't have any connections with people that I really valued. And I constantly lived with the fear of being caught out or somebody uncovering who I really was. And I just assumed that that was really bad. Whoever I was really bad. So here's the truth about how my brain works and what I needed. My cognitive processing, my autism, my mind, my brain requires time, patience, space, freedom. It requires people to respect my difference and to look beyond what they see as a physical expression of an internalised process. When I have these things, the allowance for analysis and processing, those are very, very important to me, time to analyse and process. When I have these things, my work results with more accuracy and precision. I have more thorough and expert level understandings of academic work, and I can find problems and solve them. I can really find problems in other people's work. Here's how my mind works with my body. And this is common for autistic people, but I can only speak for myself. My mind is slow to process, my body works immediately. So when there's a threat, which is a form of anything that means I'll be anxious, my body kicks into fight, flight or freeze instantly. My mind's got no idea what's going on. Like now there's no threat, but my body, my heart's racing, I'm sweating, I'm shaking, you can hear my voice is trembling. And with some autistic people, particularly non-speaking autistic people with significant support needs, they often write about the fact that their body won't follow the intention of their mind. There's a greater disconnect there, particularly when there's sensory input and it's very distracting and disconnecting. Some of my triggers are anything new and unfamiliar, anything that involves unfamiliar people or a lot of people, a feeling that my control has been compromised, so any of my freedom, choice or supports, if they're compromised or taken away, I feel hugely anxious. Again, expectations and demands I may not be able to rise to. Pressure, criticism, being wrong, still working on that one. Vulnerability, being seen, heard and noticed, and not being seen, heard and noticed. These are the ways in which my anxiety manifests, which I've just spoken about. Can also include gut pain and issues, digestion disruptions, spending a lot of time on the loo, stimming, overeating or not eating at all. And in my later teen years, drugs and alcohol became a very sad reality for me. This is what would have helped me in a classroom or in an educational environment. Being validated, exploration of my experience as a young person, my feelings, my thoughts, asking me questions to help me explore why I behaved in certain ways. Because it would bring calm, relief, it would normalise my experience had I known I was autistic, but unfortunately I didn't. Regulation, sensory input or avoidance, these are so important for autistic people. Stimming, rest. I always encourage families to really be realistic about how much our children can take on in a week. I know school requires 5 days in a row of attendance, but sometimes this is too much and it leads to trauma, exhaustion and burnout, and we have to be real in supporting our children. I allow my girls to have regular breaks from school. They don't need to give me a reason, they just need to let me know that they can't do it today. And I listen. It's really important to listen. Again, space, time and freedom, allowance for the time it takes for me to calm down, space for me to calm down, and again, freedom in processing. So that might mean that my girls, when they're anxious, will ask me questions that might seem redundant over and over and over. So they might say, "What day is it? Mum, what date is it today? So what time are we leaving?" And they'll ask the same questions over and over. What they're doing is seeking connection because they're anxious. So if I'm busy and they can't have a lot of connection with me in that moment, asking a question grabs my attention, stops me, makes me engage with them and provides them a level of comfort. Some people use meditation, grounding activities to reconnect my mind with my body, and positive self-talk and love and gratitude, messaging for my body. So I will communicate with my body and say, "Thank you, anxiety. I understand what your purpose is. Everything is okay." Sometimes this is effective, sometimes it's not. Acceptance is crucial. Current strategies that autistic people use at school should be encouraged, and scaffolding, building on the strategies and using the child's strengths to do that, and always listening. Respect for neurological differences, being gentle. And I think sometimes we have to also, again, be realistic about how much a child can perform, what they can rise to. This doesn't mean that it's lifelong, but we might need to revisit goals that we've set that are causing anxiety or might make a child feel like they're under some form of pressure. And it's not failing. It's not about failing. It's about allowing them to develop and to learn at their own rate. And these are some other ways that I could have been supported at school. Connection. Oh my God, I cannot emphasise this enough. In high school, I did have one teacher, the music teacher, of course, always the music or the art teacher. And I suspect, similarities in neurology there. Very accepting, very loving, no expectations, just happy for me to show up. Excited about me being there, encouraging me to just be there. And that made me want to be there because there was no pressure or expectation, and eventually I would engage with the work. More choice takes away my anxiety. Having a positive autistic identity is crucial. My 4-year-old has never been raised with anything other than that. She goes to kinder, she asks for what she needs, and she has no shame around it. She doesn't know that anybody would have a negative view of what autism is because as a family, it's our normal, and we put our hand up and we ask for what we want, and she's thriving in that environment because she embraces her autism. In the classroom, not singling children out. So, have you double-checked your routine on your desk there, taped to the desk for everybody to see? Probably one of the worst things that I saw happen to other students in the classroom because they'd be bullied outside of the classroom then. Rest, like I said, validation and respect. Time, space, autonomy, respect for learning styles and neurotype. So I'm now on my 3rd university degree with supports. I had no idea that I had a high IQ until I was diagnosed as autistic, which is just so interesting. But with supports, I've been able to have success academically because I've been accepted for the way my brain works and supported with that. Using music in headphones in a classroom. When I was a teacher, this was such a big no-no, and I just let the kids do it anyway because I built my classrooms to be the kind of supportive environment that I would have thrived in. I never had problems with my students. I had great relationships with them and their families, and they thrived. Music in headphones for me blocks off the distractions, the energy from other people's, and helps me to focus on what I'm doing. More input and control over my schoolwork. More say in how I do it. What are my areas of strength? How can I use those to work on projects? Am I terrified of public speaking? Then please don't make me do it in front of my peers because, again, you're making me a target. Homework. I know this will probably make me really unpopular. So many children love homework. Children like me, it just felt so overwhelming. When I go home from school at the end of the day, that's my time to unpack, analyse, process the day's events, and to come to terms with what everybody said, what they were wearing, how their hair was styled today. And I have no control over that because that's my autistic brain taking in my environment, making sense of it, and letting it go. That takes the whole entire afternoon for me to do. Unwinding. And that's the end.
I just said I wanted to validate that experience by saying what a great job that was. So interesting, and I am so proud that we've got an all-autistic female panel as the experts today, and I really hope that that's what we see more of. So Ebony's going to get up and just finish off with her presentation, and then we're going to get to the juicy questions.
So, back to a little more on executive functioning. So what I was going to do was actually take you through, in story format, my process that I actually went through to put this presentation together. But in the interest of saving time and making sure we can get to your questions, I won't give you the full-length story. But if you have a look up there, that was my process in dot points. And the whole process took me about 2 3/4 hours to get through. Yeah. So maybe I might be able to do another little video at some stage and somehow get it out to you just so that you can hear that actual story in full, because I think some of you might find it quite interesting and it gives you real insight into specifically what I do throughout every single step when I'm completing a task. But let's look at the impacts on social interaction, which is a very misunderstood area of executive functioning. So how does it impact social interactions? Firstly, by not being able to take turns in conversation. Waiting for a turn to speak, that's that impulsiveness coming through. Reacting to play situations impulsively. How your daughter might respond or your student might respond to others' emotions. Conversations, so forgetting the details of a conversation, that's forgetting the details, things that have just been said, and therefore maybe coming in and saying things that are considered inappropriate or not relevant to the conversation. Also not being able to maintain contact with friends. So I'm a person that doesn't keep in contact with people particularly well. I'm not good at follow-up and texting and checking in with people or calling, and I think, oh gosh, I haven't spoken to my sister in 6 weeks, I should probably give her a call. So that's a big part of executive functioning as well. How does it impact daily life? Every single aspect of our life, every moment of every day relies on executive functioning, some element of executive functioning. So it relates to the need or desire to have routines. That's why routines help individuals on the spectrum. It relates to self-help tasks, being able to sequence the steps in a task. It relates to misplacing or losing belongings, being able to regulate their emotions to changes in daily routines. And it also relates to the organisation of spaces. So you're thinking, gosh, there's a lot of ways that executive functioning impacts our life. What on earth are we supposed to do about that? So here's some strategies that I'm going to give you. Some of these strategies you might be aware of, and if you're aware of them as a teacher and a parent and you're already doing them, fantastic, and I encourage you to keep doing them. I'd also encourage you to pick out the things that you haven't thought of or you haven't tried. I've tried to put in things that you may not have thought of before, so I encourage you to give those a go. So colour coding, I colour code everything. Highlight, I highlight everything. I have about 12 different colours of highlighters, not just 1 or 2, and I use them frequently in my work and personal life. Labelling things. Checklists are a great thing to do. Schedules and timetables, of course. Boxes, tubs, storage systems. Now, in relation to all of those points, it's really important to make sure you have a system that works for your daughter or for your student. So it's not your system as the parent, it's not your system as the teacher, it has to work for the child. Yeah? Demonstration is one that some people often don't think of. Often we do a lot of verbal explanation about how to do a task. We're great at doing visual schedules and visual prompts, but often we don't think to demonstrate. So actually showing your child the steps they need to go through to brush their teeth and actually doing it for them while they can just sit back and observe with no expectation to do it themselves, and then doing it with them can really help. Even doing that in the classroom, if you're trying to help a child with organisation, it can be great to demonstrate what you want them to do first. Using folders and files, crossing off or counting down is one that you might already do, but so not just having the schedule, but actually crossing off the tasks. Again, we're great at doing visual scheduling, but taking away the step when it's finished, or crossing off, or saying you've got 5 steps to do, now you've got 4, now you've got 3, now you've got 2, etc. So counting down and backwards can be really helpful. Daily practices is another one that not a lot of people think of. So choosing one thing, whether it be in the classroom or at home, that you want your child or your student to do, and getting them to practice that daily each week. So you might want them to say, okay, I want you to organise one aspect of dinner time today. What's it going to be? Are you going to be responsible for the cutlery? Are you going to be responsible for taking the plates at the end of the meal? Are you going to be responsible for making sure everybody has a drink? Let them choose one element and they plan it. They work out how they're going to do it. You can help them through that. And then they do that one thing every day for a week. So daily practices of executive functioning is really useful. Role-playing as well, role-playing situations and role-playing conversations. Remember, executive functioning affects social interaction. Often girls are highly anxious and not wanting to speak to others and to speak to their peers because they're just too scared about, will I say the wrong thing? What are people going to think of me? How are they going to judge what I say? So role-playing those conversations can be really useful. Some strategies to support follow-through and time management. Again, you've got the ones that you're probably already great at already, chunking and breaking down, scheduling work time, scheduling breaks, and scheduling checklists. I had a quote up on my desk all the way through year 12, and then I kept it there for uni, which said, when you're working, work hard. When you're relaxing, relax well. I had to force myself, I had to teach myself how to relax. I still have to on a daily basis because I don't relax well. But that was my reminder. When you've scheduled a break, take your break and enjoy it. Allowing adequate time. Now, Christy mentioned this before, and this is a big thing to be aware of. Often when you set time limits, a lot of people give you as a strategy to work with children with autism, give them a time limit. Time limits can cause anxiety. Yep. So allow adequate time. You may want to get this child or student down to doing a task in 5 minutes. And that's okay if you want to get them there eventually, but don't start with 5 minutes. Allow them to do it in their own time and see how long it takes them. And if it takes them 45, fine. The next day you aim for it to take them 40, and that's okay too. It might take you 3 months to get it down to 5 minutes, but allow them the time that they need and then gradually reduce it. Something that's really important here as well is sharing your plans. So metacognition. Remember, a lot of children might not be able to think about their own thinking. So as you're doing things at home as a parent or as a teacher in the classroom, talk out loud. Really useful. Talk out loud and talk through your steps, and that helps the students to become aware of what you're doing, and they may be able to transfer that to themselves as well. And desire. That's another really important one. Often we want to teach our kids time management and follow through. But if they've got no desire to do it, you're going to have a really hard time getting them to do that. So choose one task or one activity that they quite enjoy and try and teach them time management and follow through with that one first, something they have high desire with, and leave the rest till much later on. And finally, strategies to support impulse control, attention and self-regulation. So things like involving an OT or another experienced professional for vestibular support. Who's heard of the vestibular system? I would like everybody's hand to be up next time I see you. Yep. If you don't know what the vestibular system is, go and Google it. There are some really good websites that have proper scientific information on them. I'm sure you know how to find out the right ones. Work out what the vestibular system is. Go and research it. It's very important. You really need to know how the vestibular system functions to support your students or your child. So an OT or another health professional, like myself as a neurodevelopmental therapist, I often work with the vestibular system with families. Looking to auditory processing. Supporting your daughters or your students' auditory processing needs can greatly assist them with impulse control and their ability to sustain attention as well. Regular movement outlets, sensory supports, creating plans, having scheduled breaks. Reminders to restart is really important as well. Often when you give a child a break, they forget that they have to go back to the task and keep going with it. So a reminder when they need to restart as well. Minimising environmental distractions and separate emotional regulation support away from executive functioning. So do the emotional support first, and then it'll transfer to executive functioning later on. Minimising environmental distractions is really important. So often we look at the child and let's try and change their behaviour. Let's try and change what they're doing. But particularly for executive functioning and these elements of executive functioning, the attention, the self-regulation and the impulse control, if we change the environment, the executive functioning will work much better without us even having to work on it on its own. Yep. And remember that executive functioning is a work in progress. The brain regions that's responsible for it don't mature till over 20 years of age. I'm still working on my executive functioning, and I will be until the end of time. It's not just autism. Remember that. So often we can put it down to, oh, that child has executive functioning difficulties because they've got autism. It's not just autism. Executive functioning skills can be taught. Yeah, so don't just dismiss it and put it down to the fact that it's autism and they won't ever be able to learn. They will. Yeah, and because I'm still developing my skills, that's why I'm able to help others and assist others with it and talk about it. Yeah, and encourage your girls to do the same thing. Encourage them to come up with their own strategies for executive functioning. Encourage them to keep a list of their own strategies so that they can share it with other people. They can share it with their peers. They can share it with you as their parent, and that they can share it with their teachers as well. That was a very fast overview of executive functioning, but as Katie said, this is being recorded, so you can go back and listen to it again, and hopefully I'll be able to find a way to maybe get my full story out for you so you can get a real insight into what it's like doing a task. But we're going to move on to some questions now and hopefully get through as many of your questions as we can.
I saw a lot of people nodding their heads that we're still trying to master executive functioning as adults, definitely. So what we're actually going to do now is hand out the resources early, we've decided. So we're going to, our two awesome committee members don't need to hide. They can see you. Yeah, you're in yellow. They're going to hand out the resources, and we'd love feedback on it. And also, if you found it useful, we've got the electronic version online. Share it with your teachers, friends, kindergarten, whoever it is. And you can find it at yellowladybugs.com.au/school. So we're going to go to your pre-asked questions. Ebony, do you want to choose? Yes. Yeah. All right. Sorry. Let's go with Chloe.
Yeah,
On the
that's okay.
spot, no pressure. You can. So. I don't actually have questions in front of me. Do you want to just read the one you want to answer?
Do we just do it here?
Yeah.
Okay.
I reckon.
Okay.
If they can hear you.
Okay. I'm pretty loud. Okay, so the question that I want to answer is one that I saw. If you could go back in time and talk to your teachers as yourself now, what would you have asked them to do differently, and what would have helped you? I have an entire blog post that I've written about what teachers need to know about autism, which you guys are able to go back and look at on my blog. But as a basic overview, the main thing that teachers need to know, and this isn't just about kids on the spectrum, this is about kids full stop, is no two adults are the same. So there's no correlation as to why they think that all kids have to learn the same. If there's a classroom, when I was in school, there was like 25, 30 kids in class, give or take. No two of those kids are going to learn the same. Every single kid is different, and expecting every single one of those 20, 30 kids to learn in the exact same way is ridiculous, and someone's going to be left out. And in my case, I was that kid that was left out, and there's always going to be at least one of them. I think the main thing is love us for who we are and understand and accept us for who we are, not for who we're not and never will be. And I guess like there's so many things, and I know that schools now, especially with like these programs and stuff, and the fact that there's so many educators in this room that are actually wanting to get a better insight is really, really cool. But when I was in school, autism was not only not very well known, but very stigmatized, and the only sorts of autism that was known back then was very wrong, and the idea of it and the perception of it wasn't correct whatsoever. So I think the main thing is don't assume that you know what autism is, and don't assume that you understand how autistic kids' minds are going to work. I've always said autism is like a really big, beautiful oak tree, and there's so many different branches and twigs and tiny little sticks and leaves, and they're all different even though they're all connected to the same roots. And trying to understand every single individual one of us by having a rough understanding of what those roots are is never going to work. And I know that a lot of teachers has learned about autism in their handbooks and stuff, but we're people and we can't be confined to the words of a textbook.
Good point.
And then, yeah, I just think understand that we learn differently and we are different, and the things that we need to feel safe and accepted in a classroom might be different to other kids. And yes, it might mean that you have to take a little bit of time out or learn a little bit more or spend some more time with this kid, but we're valid and we deserve to be in a classroom just as much as any other kid in that classroom does. And yes, it might be difficult, and yes, it might take a little bit of extra time, but imagine how much worse it is for that kid if you don't do anything. As their educators, you're in charge and you have got such a big impact on their future. Make it a good one. Thank you.
Very good answer. Thank you so much, Chloe. Did anyone want to add to that from the panel? Or Christy, did you want to answer one of your questions?
Yeah, I can't find it now, but there was a question about somebody's daughter struggling to know when she's being mistreated by friends or being used. Thank you. Shall I read the question out?
Yeah, if you could just put the mic a bit closer and...
Oh, sure. So this question is, can everybody hear me? My 12-year-old daughter wants to do anything to fit in and be accepted. What tips do you have to ensure she is not used? She trusts people implicitly and finds it hard to understand their motives. This has made her a target for bullies and other children with not so good motives. This begins with adults. We live in a society where everybody has this idealistic view that everybody is good innately, and sometimes that's not true, and that's a sad fact. And when we're raising children, especially autistic children, require validation of the things they perceive in other people. So if I'm having a bad day, and my children always know, it doesn't matter how hard I work to cover that up because I don't want to worry my children. If one of my girls says to me, I don't want you to be angry, Mum, or you look like you're sad, Mum. You know, as adults, sometimes we don't want to go into why we're feeling the way we are. We don't want to burden other people. With our little girls, it's important to just say, you're so right and so clever and very perceptive. Yes, I am feeling sad today. I don't feel like talking about it, but yes, very good spotting. Because when we say, no, everything's okay, we're planting self-doubt and we're interfering with a child's knowledge that something isn't okay. So then the confusion becomes, well, I know my mum wouldn't lie to me, or my dad, or my auntie, or my teacher, but I also know that what they're saying isn't 100% correct. So then when our children develop with that self-doubt, they can't trust in what they feel anymore, and so they want to believe that everything's okay all the time and everyone's good, but it's important for our children to know that sometimes people aren't all good, and sometimes they do have sinister intentions, and this is particularly important for little girls because we don't want to predispose them to perpetrators or people that will prey on their vulnerability, because as autistic girls, we are kind, compassionate, empathetic, sometimes to a fault, and it's easy for people to take advantage of us. So it's really, really important to acknowledge with our children that unfortunately there are people in the world that aren't always good, and I know that's a really difficult thing to have to do, but it's important for us to let our children know that when they're getting it right, so that we can help them build their trust in their intuition. Intuition is everything. And when we get a feeling about something not being right, which they are, because my children will say to me, somebody did this today, what do you think about this? We don't have to make a person a bad person, but it's important to acknowledge that what they're doing is not on. So that's what I would say.
That was amazing, thank you. It's really insightful, and we also had a symposium on the weekend that touched on this topic, and that video will be available shortly. And Yen talked about boundaries, and sometimes it's hard for autistic girls and women to set those boundaries, and it's really crucial to protect the empath side because it can easily weigh you down. Okay. Moving on. Did anyone want to add any comments to that? Or I think that was covered really well, and I learned something as well, because I probably do cover up and go, oh good, and I'll actually explain it more, because we do need to give explicit instructions sometimes to be clear. Okay, Ebony, your question.
There was a question about executive functioning areas, so I'm going to speak on that one first while I'm still scribing down my answer to the one that's just come in. So the question was, I have a very intelligent grade 4 student who has a lot of trouble being organised in class, never has a pen, always borrows paper, doesn't file away her work. How can I best support her, and what goals would you include in her individual learning plan? What strategies can I use? So there's a few elements to that question. The first thing I would say is focus on one thing at a time. So for example, focus on the pen, the fact that she never has a pen, and just work on that. Then go to the fact that she always borrows paper and work on that element, and then go to the fact that she never files away her work and work on that element. It would be really, really challenging, and the girl probably won't be successful if you try and get her to do all of those things at the same time. Yeah. In terms of looking at goals for an individual learning plan, I was just saying to Katie before, I do a 3-hour workshop just on writing individual learning plans for teachers because it's a huge topic, and a lot of teachers come out of university with very little knowledge and very little training in how to write an individual learning plan, but they're expected to do it as soon as they are a graduate teacher. So individual learning plans, really important to involve the student. Involve the child in the individual learning plan. So you may have a goal as a teacher that you want this girl to be more organised. It's important to speak to her and say, well, what do you want for yourself? Does it frustrate you that you're not organised in the classroom? If it does, okay, well, what element frustrates you? What one thing do you want to work on first? Yeah. Must look at the entry skills. So what can this girl do? So it's not particularly helpful to say, well, she doesn't ever bring a pen. That's what she never does. What does she do? Your entry skill may be that this girl can identify where the pens are located in the classroom. That's a skill. Yep, she knows where to find them. So your goal may therefore be, for example, if it was myself, your goal may be for Ebony to have either have a pen ready or to independently go and retrieve one in preparation for every writing task. Very specific goal. And it's very easy for her to do, considering she can locate the pens in the classroom. Yeah. In terms of strategies, ask the student what would help them. What would help you to be more organised? What can I do for you? Yeah. Always ask the student rather than trying to come up with strategies yourself. If the girl can't come up with her own strategies, then suggest some for her. Would it help you if I did this? Do you think it would help you if I would do this? Visual prompts up on the board, a personal prompt on the desk. Now, Christy mentioned this before, which was great because I was going to emphasise it as well. If you've got a personal prompt on the desk, ask the student if they're okay to be the only one in the room with a personal prompt. Some may be. But if they're not, have a personal prompt for every student about something. For that girl, it's that she needs to remember to bring a pen. For every other student, it's something different. Yeah? You could write a prompt on the bottom of their worksheet. For example, put this in your blue folder when finished, on the bottom of every time they do a worksheet to help them file away. Demonstrate, which I mentioned earlier. Yep, spend time with that student away from the rest of the class and sit down at her desk and show her what you want her to do when you've finished. Right, I want you to go and put your pen back over here. I want you to file this in your blue folder. This is where your blue folder is kept. Be the student and demonstrate it yourself. And finally, practice these skills with the whole class. Yep. How can the whole class be more organised together and make it a class learning activity as well? Just a few things.
That's really good. Thank you, Ebony. That's true inclusion, isn't it? When everyone's got something and it's not just one person being isolated. The next stage of our revolution of inclusion. It's like a poem. Okay. Chloe, did you have any other questions listed?
I don't think so. They're all
Okay.
kind of sound like mum questions.
Well, I did have one quick one that you've answered before, so you'll be prepared for it. Would you tell your daughter that she's on the spectrum, and how? Is that
Yes.
something? Yes. I knew it would be a short, easy answer for you.
I think it's just, I've always said, like, if ever I have kids, and I'm not ready for kids for a long time because I can't even make my own breakfast yet, but I've always said that I hope my kid's autistic because I find them a lot easier to understand than neurotypical people. But I think the main thing is like, I know so many people that are like, oh, like, should I tell my kid that they're autistic, or like, oh, I don't know. And like, the thing is, nothing changes. They've always been autistic. They're always going to be autistic. Getting a diagnosis helps their teachers or the people surrounding them to better understand them, to better help them. And it gives them an identity, and it gives them, and this is why I'm like this. Because I remember before I had a diagnosis, I was like, oh, I'm so weird, I'm so different, nobody likes me, like, I'm an outcast. And I was really depressed for a really long time. And then once I got a diagnosis, and once I found a community where I was like, I belong here, and there's a reasoning behind it, because autistic people like putting labels on things. And once I had a label, and once I was like, this is who I am, and it's okay, and I'm not weird, and I'm not a bad different, I'm a good different, and it's okay to be like that, then I was able to accept myself. So I think letting your child know, hey, you're autistic, and this is really freaking cool, let's find what your superpower is, that's when things are going to start changing for the better.
Great answer, and it's how we build strong, positive autistic identity, and introducing them to role models that they can learn from. Next.
Do you have another one?
Christy, next question.
I have a very social 9-year-old ladybug who suffers from anxiety and difficulty processing emotions. We've had some instances where kids at school tell of a scary story, and later at night, and for many, many nights after, this is the story of my life, by the way, my daughter has massive anxiety and insecurity issues at play, affecting sleep and daytime neediness. This will presumably be worse if it was visual scary stuff. She can barely tell us anything about the story or her feelings. This is my children as well, because we're all visual learners. This is why I avoid watching the news or reading the paper sometimes, because even when I'm reading it, it creates a picture in my head that I can never unsee. And this happened to me this morning. So how I handle this with my daughters, because it just riddles your life when you see something you can't unsee, and it's horrible. We take the story and we pull it apart and we turn it into something else. So if there's a frightening character, then I might say, okay, so he carries 40 toilets on his arms. Or make it something really silly or so ridiculous that you change the visual picture that your child has with them. So we would do that together. We'd take this horrendous experience and turn it into something so unbelievable and so ridiculous that most of the time we'd end up laughing about it. If it's something that they've seen on the news or something like that, for example, an act of terrorism, or they've heard about that, I always encourage my children to look for the people in those situations who are the helpers. And I know there's a quote about this, I can't remember it, but always seek out the amazing human beings who are associated with awful events, who are working behind the scenes to bring healing and help, because that is also a predominant part of our world as well. It's not just all bad, but because we can be catastrophic thinkers, well, I can only speak for myself, I'm a catastrophic thinker. Negative things, I can absolutely fixate on them and become, it becomes a whole universal thing for me. Oh, the world's bad and we're all going to die. And even as an adult, I still do this, and it can take me down so low for months. There are visuals in my head from childhood that I will never be able to unsee, and it can be traumatic. So it's important for us to remind our children of the good in what they see and to find the light in the darkness. I hope that makes sense.
A lot of sense. Thank you so much. And I agree. We've got to flip it on its head sometimes. Ebony.
Yes, I think I'm ready now. I've been scribbling down notes this whole time for this question, so there's probably other things I'd like to say that I don't have time, so whoever gave it to me, if you want to come and we can touch base at the end and maybe connect in another way too. So the question was, so for teachers, can you explain what the term masking is to me? It says as well, thanks Christy for starting a great conversation about masking. And can I explain what the mental health implications are and how these affect children at a young age? Big question. So this is something I'm still learning about. This is at the forefront for me right now, which was evident at the event last week. The Yellow Ladybugs mental health event, that will be available on video as well. So to me, masking is not self-advocating. That's how I can put it most simply. Masking is not self-advocating for myself and for what I need. Masking disconnects me from other people. And the thing that I've started doing more recently, and it's great to be aware that your daughter or your student might be doing it, that we can mask while we're actually talking about masking. So I'm talking to you right now about the fact that I mask, and I know that I mask and what I do when I'm masking, but I'm still masking at this point in time right now, and you don't actually know that. So we have this great ability to mask while we're talking about masking as well, which makes it challenging for you to pick up when we're actually doing it and when we're not. So what are the mental health implications? Biggest one is not receiving the required supports. That's the biggest one. Another big one for me, which I'm sure is common for a lot of girls and women out there, is telling myself that I can't look after my mental health. So masking for so long has caused me to believe that I don't actually have the right to look after my own mental health. And that's something I'm trying to break down at the moment. Because of other people's expectations of me. So because I've masked so well throughout all my life, people have very, very high expectations of me, and this is particularly true when I'm at work. I function really well when I'm at work. I'm not the same person at home, and people don't understand that. They don't know that I'm almost two different people, and I don't function in the home environment. So masking has forced me to actually push myself past breaking point. And still, my clients at work haven't recognised that I'm past breaking point and still just expect me to get on and do everything that I would usually do. So masking allows you to make some relationships, and masking has allowed me to make peer relationships over the years. But then when you try to stop masking, so that's what I'm trying to do now, I'm trying to stop masking as much and speak to people about it. Now as I'm trying to do that, it's actually even affecting my relationships more, particularly with family members, because I've masked for so long. Now all of a sudden when I start trying to request what I need, it's suddenly a big issue. And suddenly I'm making it up, or it's not really true, or I'm over-exaggerating, because I've got through with life up until this point now without it. Why is it an issue now? How does it affect young children? Chloe mentioned this before, not knowing who you are. I can't tell you who I am today. I have no idea. And I'm trying to start myself down a pathway where I can actually discover that. When I was younger, I thought I knew who I was, but I've now realised that I've just completely lost myself again. I know who I am at work. I know exactly who I am as a therapist and an educator, but as a person, no idea. So you don't know who you are when you mask. You completely lose yourself. So that's where I'm at the point of exactly what Chloe said. Do you tell your daughter? Yes. Yeah, tell her. She already knows. She just maybe doesn't have the word autism, but she knows. Yeah. And by telling girls early, and boys and other children, it just hopefully will open a pathway so that they don't have to mask as much and don't have to go through the experiences that all of us have been through.
Any other questions?
I'm just learning about this now. Advice for teachers to better communicate the expectations of what a task involves in the classroom and what this looks like, and why this is important. Example, in groups, circle on the floor, standing up in front of a class. The consequences of not knowing what to expect. I'm unsure of what the actual question is, sorry.
Okay, do you want...
Who else?
Hang on, I'll get your microphone.
Sorry, it's because I'm just reading it now for the first time. No processing time.
I haven't read it either.
Hello. Hello, ladies. My daughter struggles with asking for help and masks, and she also struggles with comprehension of what is expected of her, and descriptions of a homework task or a classroom activity isn't enough for her to understand what that will look like, what is expected. So how better can the teachers prepare for that and tell her, you know, this task, we'll be doing it on the floor in a circle, or you'll be doing it in groups of 4, or you'll be required to stand up in front of the class. Because not knowing what to expect is causing so much anxiety at home that she can't function. And yeah, just more information in a simple format that she can understand and go, oh, she actually liked the task in the end, but the whole time she was feeling vulnerable, putting on a face, so no one else knew she was freaking out. Yeah.
Do you want to take this?
I can start if you want to keep thinking about it to have some more
Yeah,
time.
you
But
go
something came to mind then. Something that I know would have helped me in that situation, and I did sometimes do this as a teacher in my classrooms with particular activities, is having a practice go and actually making that explicit to the child or to the students. So sometimes the difficulty can be around, okay, I'm being asked to do this task. I've been told what I have to do. But what if I don't do it well enough? What if I don't do it perfectly? What if I don't achieve what I know I'm capable of achieving in this task? And if I only get one go at it, and that's where a lot of the stress and anxiety might be coming from. So the teachers might be able to say, we're going to do this task, explain it how they're explaining it currently, and say, but this is a practice run of this task. We're going to do exactly the same task again tomorrow. So therefore that girl can go, okay, so if I don't get it right this time, it doesn't matter. I'm not being assessed on it, I'm not being judged, I'm not being evaluated. I get to do exactly this same thing tomorrow. So actually physically have a practice go and repeat exactly the same activity the next day. The other thing I would do would just be putting it more in visual format, but with like real photographs. So taking photos of real objects in the classroom or real spaces in the classroom and almost creating like a visual scene. I mean, go ahead and create a 3D model if you're that enthusiastic as well. But creating a visual scene, so similar to a social story, but in much more detail, and so that they can actually vividly see this is what it will look like. I'll be sitting here, this person will be sitting here, etc., and actually map it out. Allow the student to take it home as well, depending on what the event is. If it's a big event, for example, if I was planning for an excursion, I would be planning 4 weeks ahead for an excursion for a student with autism, yeah? And I would be sending home new resources for them every week in the lead up to that excursion, so they had a lot of preparation to do it. So yeah, that's just a couple of quick points that come to mind.
I would also use person first language. So if I was teaching a student with those difficulties, not all students respond well to social stories, but having a breakdown of the steps and wording it from the student's perspective. I will, step 1. I will then, step 2. So it becomes their experience and they have a better understanding of what they're expected to do.
I would also get the teacher to do each step and show them what it looks like. So then they can visually see, this is the first step of the activity, then it will look like this, then it will look like this. Visuals are so important. Is there any others?
Yeah.
Oh,
This
well,
cool.
I'll go over here. I've only got time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. And
Jessie.
Hi. I have a daughter that has just started high school and she is feeling quite overwhelmed at the moment, but she doesn't want to ask for help, and I haven't been able to find out exactly what her anxiety is about that, whether it's what it is. But do you have any suggestions on how you might have felt, or what you would recommend she do, or teachers? Should I talk to teachers, or because I know in high school they're expecting the students to take responsibility for themselves now rather than the parents.
So the reason she doesn't want to get help is because she's already standing out enough as it is. When I was in high school, I was the exact same. I would be struggling with something and there was no way in hell I was going to put my hand up and ask for help, because I already felt like an idiot. I already felt like I wasn't fitting in. I already felt like people were looking at me. And even if they not necessarily were, I felt like that was. So the idea of putting myself out more than I already felt like I was and asking for help was worse than getting help in the first place. So I think as far as actually getting that help, maybe talking to her teachers and talking to the school and getting that point through to them, being like, hey, my daughter's struggling with whatever it is that she might be struggling with. And once the teacher kind of understands that and goes, okay, well, she might need help. But also I think, like we've touched on it a few times, not singling her out and being like, hey, like, do you need help? Because girls aren't going to go, yes, I need help. They're going to be like, no, like they're going to say no, even if they do. I think there's been a couple of times where Ebony said things about the things that you can do to, like, I don't know what the word is, subtle signs of asking for help.
Yes.
I think,
I like the cue card.
I was just about to mention that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go.
Okay.
You know each other so well.
So, yes, I was going to say non-verbal ways of asking for help. Yeah, I've just written journal down here. The other points that Chloe is referring to that I've mentioned in the past as well, having even just an item that can be any item at all. It could be a pen, for example, a specific pen, that your daughter could go and just give the pen to the teacher, and that teacher then knows, okay, when I've finished this class discussion, I need to just go and see if she needs some support. So it's not, she doesn't need to speak, doesn't need to verbally say anything, doesn't need to be obvious. She's just giving the teacher a pen, but it can just be something like that, putting a card on the table, so forth. A journal might really help you as well, though, at the moment, even as a parent. Maybe you could just start a journal with her, with your daughter, and just write a little note to her in your journal. You know, it might be something like, I want you to know it's okay to ask for help. I know you might not feel like it's okay, but it is okay. I've asked for help in my life. Give her some examples of you. If you feel like writing a note back to me and let me know what areas you'd like some help in, then I might be able to give you some support. And she might not get back to you for 3 or 4 weeks. But over those 3 or 4 weeks, you might jot down little notes in a journal, and then one day she may just leave it on your pillow or something, or in the kitchen, and then you can just read it. And I would encourage you, if she does that and does respond by giving you the journal back, don't then try and start a verbal conversation. Keep it all non-verbal through the journal, because that's then her safe way to communicate, and it's perfectly okay to communicate non-verbally.
Yeah.
That may really help.
That's a good answer. And just to keep to time, that will be our final question. But if you do have anything, send us an email and we'll send it through to our speakers and we can try and help you guys there. So I just wanted to thank our panel for the amazing work they've done today, for enlightening us with their insights. And by creating a greater understanding of these unique challenges for autistic girls at school, there is a chance for opportunity to improve the support and make a positive difference. The current obstacles that our girls are facing are many and varied, but they can be overcome with improved knowledge from autistic women, teachers, and people who have a real passion in this area. We encourage families and schools to work together and listen to our girls. It's obvious to me that our community has a lot to learn from our tribe elders, as you are. And by listening directly to autistic women, we can get this information from lived experience. What better way to learn for the next generation than by this method? And I'm very proud that we are able to deliver something like this today.